Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name is Savannah Herenque if you're new here, and if you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is Wednesday, January the 12th, and today I am joined by our own AL.com columnist, Kyle Whitmire. And Kyle is here today to talk about a new initiative that we have launched at AL.com and that he's been working very hard on. And you might have seen it on the website this morning if you've been there yet. And it is called State of Denial: How 150 Years of Whitewashed History Poisons Alabama Today. Now, this is a meaty story. There's a lot of things in this story, Kyle, a lot of points that maybe some of us knew, especially about the Capitol and different statues at the Capitol. And there is mentions of the Alabama Memorial Preservation Act that was passed several years ago. But there's also mentions of things that probably many Alabamians didn't know. So I want to give you just a second to kind of summarize this part one of your series, talk a little bit about it, and what you think are the most important takeaways from this story.
Well, I mean, this whole series really began for me out of the end of last legislative session. Was very bitter, very divided. There's a lot of acrimony, and I started thinking about the bigger picture things in Alabama, and like, why are we the way we are? Why are we so divided? Why do we have these persistent problems that we do not solve? And I started doing some exploratory reporting, doing historical research, doing just looking back at Alabama history and what we may have missed. I started off the series sort of taking a little tongue-in-cheek tour of the Alabama Capitol, which was the capital of the Confederacy for all of 3 months. But if you tour the Capitol today, it seems like that's the only thing that ever happened there. And that's just not true. I mean, this is where, the Selma marchers ended their journey from Selma and the voting rights marches. This is where Martin Luther King and John Lewis and so many others aired their grievances and demanded that this country live up to its obligations to all citizens. I mean, it's, there are other things that have happened there too. This is where George Wallace said segregation now, tomorrow, and forever. And most importantly, I think for Alabama today, this is the place where in 1901, delegates gathered for the state constitutional convention and wrote a document that was designed in their terms. And this is not just the willy-nilly phrase we throw around, to embed white supremacy in the law. There's actually, in the minutes of the Constitutional Convention, there's a subhead that says white supremacy by law. And this is still the same document that we operate under today. This is now the longest constitution in the world. There's still lots of racist language in it. And it was designed to consolidate power in Montgomery, where special interests and powerful people could control the state and wrest power away from local jurisdictions, cities, counties, where Black people potentially could get majorities and have some control over their own destinies. And we still see that today. And the piece is not so much about the Monuments Bill as it is how the Alabama Constitution makes the Monuments Bill possible, and that the Monuments Bill is the Constitution doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is, in Montgomery and Birmingham and other places in the state, you have mayors, city councils, county commissions that have these Confederate statues in their communities, in their public squares. And frankly, they just don't want them there anymore. And they are not allowed to move them because, quite frankly, a majority of Alabamians, excuse me, I didn't turn off my phone. They're not allowed to move them because a majority of Alabama lawmakers decided that they would make it illegal for them to do so. And so it's just another example of how some folks 120 years ago wrested control away from from Black people even today.
Well, and it seems like, and I'm glad you mentioned that about the Memorial Preservation Act, because it seems like what you're doing really in this piece is giving us an illustration of, as you said, how people who drafted this 1901 Constitution really envisioned it to work and envisioned it to live on, with the Alabama Memorial Preservation Act being one of those ways. You mentioned that. You mentioned also, again, things that have happened in Montgomery at the Alabama State Capitol, but are really not memorialized there, as are different statues of Confederate leaders, different types of memorials and plaques there, but not of the things like you mentioned about John Lewis and the March from Selma and other events of that nature. Now,
Right.
I also want to ask you, you mentioned about this Constitution. We know that this is still the Constitution of Alabama. It has been amended a record 977 times. I think you mentioned it's the
Closing in on
longest.
1,000 any day now.
Right. Closing in on 1,000, longest in any state and country. So it's the
Right.
longest in the world. That is not, that's quite a Guinness Book of World Records award there. Now, you mentioned all of these different things to kind of, again, illustrate that point of what this Constitution is doing. Now, you do this and you interview several lawmakers about it and about their thoughts on this entire kind of position. So, do you think when you call this series, again, State of Denial, do you think that lawmakers are really putting two and two together, that this creation of that 1901 Constitution is still affecting Alabama? Or do you think that it's a little bit more removed for most people?
I think they have power and they're not going to question the legal apparatus that gave them that power. I've asked lawmakers, and not just Mike Holmes, who's quoted in this piece, but other lawmakers for other pieces, like, do you think it's appropriate that the state legislature should be able to tell cities and counties what to do with their affairs? And they've said to me, yes, they're fine with that. They think that that's a perfectly good system. These are many of the same folks who will argue the states' rights argument when the federal government comes in and tries to tell Alabama what to do, right? They'll argue in a different context that the government closest to the people governs best. I think that came from Thomas Jefferson. But so it's really for them. I think it is not always so much about race as it is about power. But when you see how they exercise it, look, if an alien, if someone completely with no concept of any context of Alabama politics came to the Alabama legislature, no foreknowledge whatsoever, and watched what happened there, didn't understand our political parties or anything. I mean, I think their first observation would be that we have, let's face it, a white people's party and a black people's party. I mean, there's so many votes there that are split along racial lines, and black representatives just get run slap over in the legislature. And it happens over and over again. Even when they raise their hands, they make very well-reasoned objections. Even when they try to stop lawmakers and say, hey, we please talk about this because we think this is racist. Those other lawmakers may not have like racist motives for opposing them, but at some point, when you disregard those objections over and over and over again, it becomes hard to see it as anything other than just a different flavor of racism.
Well, we look at, again, in your story, you interview several different representatives. You interview a black lawmaker and a white lawmaker. Interesting tidbits from both of these interviews. One from the white lawmaker, Representative Mike Holmes. He mentions his familial ties that date back to the Confederacy, and you go into detail about that in your story here. But something that I thought was very interesting that he said, and again, he's not from Birmingham or the Jefferson County area, but he made a comment about that he didn't know what Kelly Ingram Park was. And
Right.
I think that kind of plays into what you were just saying is there is maybe a just lack of knowledge about a lot of things that are going on in the state, or even not caring necessarily about different things that have happened in the state, especially with civil rights in the history of Alabama, and of course Birmingham being the capital of civil rights.
Well, I'll give you a little preview, a little spoiler of part two right now, because I think it goes to show how much has been lost. Because a lot of this series is not about, it's not so much about Confederate monuments as it is about what monuments aren't there. I grew up in Alabama. I went to Alabama public schools. I took Alabama history when I was in school twice. Once in fourth grade and once I think in eighth grade. And ninth grade. I took it. But earlier this year, I learned of a race massacre in Eufaula, Alabama, where somewhere between 7 and 10 people were shot dead in the street, another 70 or so wounded while they were going to vote. They were walking into town. This happened in the 1870s. And these men were walking into town to try to vote. And they were ambushed, they were killed, and subsequent from that, sort of Reconstruction ended in Alabama. And that's what the second piece in the series is going to look at. This is a hugely significant event in our state's history. I never learned about it. There are people in Eufaula where this happened who don't know about it, who've lived there their whole lives. And we look at these, I call them, I say these monuments are not history, they're artifacts. We look at them and we say, well, this is history. History is not just a celebration of mythologized figures. It's also a process of introspection and an opportunity to sort of interrogate ourselves and try to figure out how we can become a better community and a better state.
Something that's kind of on the flip side of that coin is you do an interview and you record that interview. There's a piece of a video part of that in the story as well, with the Representative Wanda Lynn Gavan. Now, this representative is a Black lawmaker, and she kind of talks about something you were just mentioning about calling these different memorials artifacts. And there is often a calling card of the conservative majority here in Alabama that, oh, people who want to get rid of these monuments want to erase history, right? We hear that very often. And this representative has actually presented a bill before that says, look, no, these are artifacts. We don't necessarily want to destroy them. We think that they should go where other artifacts go. So tell me a little bit about that and about that bill.
Yeah, her bill last year, which it failed also. And Mike Holmes, I should point out, introduced a bill to make it extremely punitive for cities to remove these monuments. Right now, it's a $25,000 fine. He wants to make it a repeating fine for every day that those monuments are removed. Gavan's bill is sort of the mirror opposite of it. She wants to, again, make cities and counties able to transfer ownership of these monuments to the state or to other nonprofits and entities that could take care of them. And one solution that's been proposed, we have this thing in Alabama called Confederate Memorial Park. And I think she and others would like to see it turned into a park for Confederate memorials. Like, this is a place where we can, excuse the pun, park these things, where people who are interested in them can go and see them, and they can do what monuments do. But yeah, I do think that this is, and I think Gavan agrees with it. These are not lawmakers saying that these things should be ground down into sand, but they should be preserved. But they don't have to occupy places of honor in our most public spaces.
What do you say to people that say, you know what, maybe in 1901, the Alabama Constitutional Convention was made up of people who were racist and who wanted to, again, embed in the law white supremacy by law as, again, a subhead
Right.
in that document. What do you say to people who say, well, that was 1901. Things are different now. It's 2022 at this point, and we all have the same rights. What's your argument to that?
Well, first of all, Alabama was not the only state during that time to adopt a constitution like the one we have. Lots of southern states did that. The states around us, though, really in the late 60s through the early 80s, they met, they reconvened, they said, we're going to start over. We're going to start, we're going to write our own constitutions. In fact, the constitution that we have right now is the sixth constitution that Alabama ever had. It's not impossible to start over and write one of these things. And I think we should do it. I think it would be a good exercise for Alabamians today to take control of our own identity and our own government and our own culture. And so if in fact what you're saying is, your hypothetical question here is true, if that's not who we are today, then let's make this document different too. Let's make it reflect us and who we are now.
Why do you call the Alabama state capitol a crime scene?
Because that's where these delegates in 1901, and there's also another constitution. It was called the post-Reconstruction Constitution. That was sort of the precursor to 1901 that did sort of half the job. Was also written there in 1875. But these two documents took the right to vote away from Alabamians, specifically Black Alabamians, disenfranchised them, took power away from local officials, and consolidated that power in Montgomery, and set the stage for Jim Crow laws, for convict leasing programs. And this is theft. If someone came, to you today and took away your right to vote, I think you would feel like you had been a victim of a crime. And the people who lost their rights through for the next really 70 years, and in some instances still today, they lost them in that state capitol in 1901. That's the place where it happened. That's the scene of the crime.
Kyle, I know that this is not something that you're going to let go here. And I know we have more parts coming to this series, the State of Denial series. So tell us a little bit about how you are going to make this kind of your mission. I know this is something you're not letting go. You're not just publishing it and calling it a day.
I'm not the first newspaper columnist in Alabama to say that we need a new constitution. Better editorial writers, better columnists than me have tried to slay this dragon and failed. There have been movements periodically in the past to write a new Alabama Constitution. But typically what has happened when we in the media have taken up this cause is there would be a 5-part series. We love 5-part series in the newspaper business, right? And, there at the end of it, there would be this sort of fist banging editorial saying this is, a travesty and it can't be allowed to continue. And then it would kind of go away and this thing would continue. We're calling this not a series, but an initiative. We're going to involve historians. We're going to try to do some community outreach. We're going to get creative with this and make it much more than just 5 newspaper articles in a row with a Roman numeral behind each of them that run and then are forgotten. And heck, I might be writing about this for the rest of my life. We'll see. But you're right. I'm not going to give up.
I think I know that about you, and I think most of our audience does as well. Now, Kyle, again, if people have not read this story, you can find it on AL.com. This series is called "The State of Denial: How 150 Years of Whitewash History Poisons Alabama Today." Part 1 is out. It's available on AL.com. It's available here. We've linked it in the comments for you, and if you follow Kyle on social media, you will get it there as well. So, Kyle, thank you for coming, breaking down this initiative for us, telling us a little bit about the history here and what we can expect in the following parts.
Thanks, Savannah.
And we will see you tomorrow.